Okay.
I'm sorry, I don't have a good tool though.
Let me just move the ladder over that way.
Yes, you're not sure area of basement.
Okay. Right, when I recommendation would be GP superior private security and have them come out and they can tell you everything else. They would be the experts that would be clear.
We done?
Yeah.
Since it is their box, I'm saying you can do it.
And you saw Mr. Minton facing north taking the pictures, and you saw the door from the frame. The woman testified unequivocally before God and everybody that she opened the door fully 90 degrees across the sidewalk at that moment. And you can see the door closed. You can see the shadow, its angle unchanging across the top of the door. And you remember she told you, of those two doors, that's the only one that opens. Another thing I'd like for you to take a look at when you have leisure, go back to the beginning of the tape and look at how much of the ladder is covered by the door when the door is open. When the bread men come out, the door is open fully. Then it closes, and it covers everything of the ladder out across the sidewalk except the outside leg. But you have an unobstructed view of both legs of the ladder throughout that incident where Mr. Minton is facing north taking the picture. There's no way to overemphasize the import of that, Your Honor.
All right, just hold on.
Okay. That's the last video that I have, I believe. But again, Your Honor, we have filed the original transcript of her testimony, and her testimony is unequivocal. For a space of 1 to 2 seconds, while Mr. Minton was facing north down Waterson Street, taking photographs with his back to her and his back to the ladder, she opened that door fully, 90 degrees, and saw him up there. Your Honor, the old saw is, oh, what a tangled web we weave when first we practice to deceive. I think the illustration we have here is that we weave rather a more tangled web when we don't practice enough. She told us she saw the video once. Maybe they should have left her with a copy of the video for a while. Because, Judge, you cannot reconcile that testimony with what is on Scientology's surveillance tape. That didn't happen. And that's probably why she wasn't here before yesterday. Because nobody conceived a need to put a little spackle in that hole until we came back to court yesterday. Now, another interesting thing about her testimony is this. She testified that she saw Mr. Avila when she opened the door that doesn't open at the time she said it opened. She said she looked a little to her right and she saw him on the sidewalk somewhere in the area of his regular beat. However, in one of those moments that always takes you by surprise, I asked her what was outside the door, what was parked there. And what did she tell you, Judge? Nothing. She testified that there was nothing there. Well, let's leave for the moment the fact that we all see the bread truck there, that we see the bread men coming and going unimpeded, making their bread delivery. Forget what our own eyes tell us. Ask yourself this, Judge. She testified that she had parked her van south of that door. Why? Because she couldn't park up there by the door. So she was impeded by a bread truck which was either not there or was there but was invisible to her from parking in her normal place next to the door, and was thereby forced to park south down the block. Now, she testified, and everybody remembers this phrase, and I'm afraid, although he said many brilliant things, it's the only thing that Dean Wigmore is remembered for. Dean Wigmore once said that cross-examination is the greatest engine yet devised by the mind of man for the divination of the truth. And you saw a little bit of that here yesterday. Because she originally testified that what she was doing was delivering these 200 meals to the poor, hungry children at the Quality Inn. It was only later, when she was examined by the court and then by myself, that she conceded that what she was actually doing was going to get the van to move it. She didn't have any food loaded. She wasn't headed out the door with food. She wasn't on her way to load the van. She was on her way to walk to the van to change its parking location. Now, what she admits but can't explain is why she was going out the door of the Clearwater Bank building. You've seen the video. That's the last door north on the building. There's not a door in the place that is further from where she was going than the door that she lied about stepping out of. She couldn't get any further away and still be in the bank building. She admitted that the door that she had come in was right next to where the van was parked and way more than 10 feet away from Mr. Minton and myself. But she didn't go that way. The reason is that none of this happened. And if she goes out that door, there's no point in her coming here and telling you this story. If she goes out the door she came in. Now, it is important. Courts under the Anglo-Saxon system of jurisprudence have always, and you may or may not be aware of this, a lot of people aren't, but going back 800 years and more, courts sitting in any capacity have been regarded as the particular guardians of children anytime that the welfare of children touches on the work of the court. And the court was, as I assume everybody was, alarmed when she talked about her mission to feed the poor hungry children out of the RPF camp at the Quality Inn. She also testified, I can't tell you that my schedule was disrupted. I can't tell you that I was late. I can't tell you that it made any difference to when I delivered those things. You have her testimony up there filed, Judge. And if you need anything else to tell you that her testimony was 100% rotten through and through, if Scientology's videotape your own eyes and the force of cross-examination doesn't do it, go back to the man behind the curtain. Laboring in obscurity is the deputy chief steward for the Quality Inn, thinking her own thoughts. Suddenly, out of nowhere, these unuttered thoughts are divined by some operative from OSA who mystically appears and tells her the lawyers need to talk to her about December 4th. And then you have a story that cannot be matched with anything else in evidence. Judge, if you want to look at the linchpin that the entire case for Scientology hangs on, if you want to look at the substance of that case, the substance of that case is in the patent falsehoods brought to you by Ms. Winberg and whoever decided she needed to talk to her. That's what this case stands and ultimately falls on. Now, is this, from Scientology's perspective, serious business regarding the injunction and the goals of the injunction and the purposes of the injunction? Is it correct that, by God, somebody needs to wipe the smile off these people's faces and still the laughter in their mouths? Is that the important thing?
And do what?
Still the laughter in their mouths. Well, it might be, except that it doesn't appear to be an injunction that Scientology itself takes very seriously. And you are sitting at this moment as a chancellor in equity. This is an equitable matter because it deals with an injunction. Clean hands is one of the prerequisites to seeking relief from a chancellor. Here's the interesting thing, through the testimony of Scientology's own witnesses. On January 6th, you have the exhibit in evidence. Mr. Avila told you that Tori Bazazian, Arnie Lerma, and John R. Enerson were picketing in the orange zone on Pierce Street, north of the Fort Harrison Hotel, and that he himself came around the corner and into that orange zone while they were picketing. That's how careful Scientology is about the injunction. That they sent their security man taking these photographs into an area that you specifically reserve for people to exercise their First Amendment rights. You hear Mr. Enerson on the tape telling Mr. Avila, look, you're within 10 feet, you need to get out of here, you're violating the injunction. Secondly, the great and terrible Tori, while she was terrifying all of downtown Clearwater, walking beside the parking lot of the Coachman building, stopped to talk to the car entering the driveway, Do you remember what happened, Judge? Do you remember what one of these poor, put-upon, desperate Scientologists did? Here's Ms. Bazazian. And here comes, what? Not just any Scientologist, a Scientology security man on a bicycle and rides a loop around her. It was the witness who testified to it, on the sidewalk with her. That's how serious this is. That's how serious they are about it. Judge, what all this means is real simple. It means that they're here hoping that you will bite on what is at best allegations of technical violations and make somebody a criminal for it. You want another one? The evidence is uncontroverted that Mr. Avila came within 10 feet of Mr. Minton on the night of January 7th when Mr. Minton was hollering at the police. Now, you didn't make an exception for people who are taking videotapes. You didn't make an exception for Scientologists or for Scientology security men. What you have, Judge, is Scientology coming in here asking for criminal convictions based on an injunction that they're treating as though it were unilateral, that they are treating as though it were simply a harness on critics, that they are treating as though it had nothing to do with them. He who seeks equity must do equity. The other thing that we really should take a look at, going back now to the December 4th spy cam incident, what we really need to take a look at to lay this matter to rest. You remember Mr. L. Campbell testified that there's videotapes running on all these cameras, and all these cameras are running 24 hours a day. That's his job, is whatever his shift is, to watch them for that portion of the 24 hours a day. We can put this issue about whether or not the camera was disturbed or thrown out of focus to rest simply by re-examining the videotapes from the spy cameras, which would clearly show the field of view as I approached the camera and as Mr. Minton and I left the camera. However, Judge, we're not going to do that. And I think you know why we're not going to do that. It's because Scientology didn't bring you the videotapes. Now, it just seems to me that if you're the one in possession of the evidence, and you contend that that evidence would support a proposition that you have offered, and you don't produce the evidence, it says more about your proposition than it does anything else. Every comment that you have heard, Judge, that was made outside of court by a critic, specifically Mr. Minton and Ms. Bazazian, regarding the injunction, has been what? Thank God. They can't get in our faces anymore. The one my hat's off to him for reading the whole paragraph, but when Mr. Pope read to you from that posting by Ms. Bazazian, after bogus injunction, it says, I guess they didn't realize that it would protect us too. The bogus character, the stupid character, doesn't lie in the injunction itself, and I think that's clear when you look in context at the entirety of Ms. Bazazian's statement. It's that Scientology spent however much money they spent trying to get you to put a leash on the critics alone, and you saw through it and entered a bilateral injunction that actually protects people's right to pick. I mean, you saw what happened in July during the window when the old injunction expired. Hordes of Scientologists come boiling down the street, inches from the critics. You saw on the film Mr. Minton being shoved out into the street. You saw Mr. Minton being hit. You saw Mr. Bunker being stepped on. You saw other critics being punched. Well, that's what's stupid and bogus, is Scientology and OSA spending whatever they spent and finding out that what it did was prevent them from doing that as well. Every time that you've seen a comment about the injunction that was made outside of this courtroom, whatever the other comments are, it also says, but you know, it protects us too. Some famous paleo historian, I think it was Arnold Toynbee, said that the life of man in a state of nature was nasty, brutish, and short. Now, the first time I heard that quote, I assumed that they were talking about me. But it turns out that it was, in fact, Professor Toynbee talking about primitive man. The fact is, Judge, that human civilization has come a long way just in the life of this nation. But what we forget is this. The history of mankind overall is a dark, dark night. And freedom and the rights of the individual are a shooting star. It's not going to last. It's never lasted before. There have been brief moments. There was classical Greece where men spoke their minds. But that dream and that bright moment died when Socrates was put to death for speaking his mind, for uttering unpopular ideas. Rome had its heyday as a republic, and it ended as a debauched empire. And liberty again faded from the scene. And it actually didn't come back until this country was founded. 1,400 years later, after Rome fell, after the dark hand of history closed on the throat of man again. The question that each of us has to answer, Judge, and unfortunately you more than anybody else, is this. During this brief hour, before mankind returns to the darkness that our liberty arose from, how have we tended the delicate flame of our liberty? Judge, this is a criminal case. You know the law. You know your duty. Thank you for your attention.